as an advocate that I wish I knew as a parent, hosted by Right to Read Advocacy. I'm Jennifer Bernheim, your moderator for today's webinar and founder of Right to Read Advocacy. The mission of our organization is to educate and empower families of dyslexic learners. In addition to direct advocacy and parent coaching, we offer free educational webinars such as this one today. Also, we recently launched the Right to Read podcast in conjunction with Verso Studios at the Westport Public Library. Be sure to check that out on your favorite streaming platform. Also, the podcast is available from our website. And while you're there, please be sure to check out our Empower You Scholarship for high school seniors. The deadline is coming quickly as it's Friday, February 28th. Also, this webinar is a part of our Empower You webinar series, and our next will be held on Thursday, March 6th at 7 p.m. In celebration of Read Across America Week, author, illustrator, and puppet maker Krista Weltner will be reading from her debut picture book series, Molly, Everyday Adventures with Molly and Dyslexia, which was inspired by her own journey of growing up with dyslexia. All right, so welcome. Please pop into the chat where you're from if you haven't done so already. Feel free to ask questions via the chat and we will address those as we're moving through the webinar. And then also please note that our webinar is being recorded so that we can share it afterwards. And Right to Read is unique and a unique advocacy organization, and that it's comprised of advocate members, 3 of whom are here with us today. So I'm pleased to introduce my Right to Read colleagues, Robin Beauchemin, Megan Hunemuller, and Catherine Scholl. All right, so let's jump in because we are all brought together today and on this journey, first being parents of students with dyslexia. And we find that our personal journeys can sometimes inspire our professional paths. And that's how we have become connected through advocacy as we are advocating for our own children. So I wanted to start there and really hear about each of our professional journeys, and maybe I'll weigh in at the end. But who would like to get started?
I can. I'm Robin Beauchemin. I am in Connecticut.
Where you stand on all of that.
Okay. And I am an advocate with Right to Read. So my son struggled all throughout his time in school and was identified as a dyslexic learner in 8th grade, which was pretty far beyond when a child should be evaluated. So that kind of inspired me to take some advocacy courses. And here I am with Right to Read.
Great. Do you want to talk more about how you uncovered that he was dyslexic?
Sure. So he never had any type of intervention or an IEP. He just, had a lot of behaviors, work avoidance, that sort of thing, school refusal. Now he's kind of knew something was wrong, but, no one had ever pulled me aside and mentioned any concerns with his reading. He didn't like to read, but he's my ADHD kiddo, and those kids don't like to sit still. So it just kind of made sense. He just doesn't like to read. But we had decided to start a journal, and he wrote down some of his feelings, and in 8th grade had some letter reversals and spacing issues. And I just thought, what is happening here? So I went to the school and said, I need you to evaluate him, in which they did. And they said he had, a reading weakness, but they never called it dyslexia. So then we had a private neuropsych done by a neuropsychologist in Ipswich, Massachusetts, who then said he had double deficit dyslexia. So he was in 8th grade, reading at a 5th grade level. And that is how we had him identified.
And what were the next steps after that?
So he was actually outplaced to one of the private schools in Connecticut that remediated kids with dyslexia. And he was there for a couple of years. He then went back to the high school after that, and he's doing well. He's a senior and he's going to graduate this year, and he's a very resilient kid, and I'm very proud of him.
Thanks for sharing, Robin. Megan?
Hi, I'm Megan Hunemuller from Iowa, and our time into dyslexia happened when my daughter, who is now an 8th grader, was in 1st grade. She was sent home. The graph that they have to fill in by tens 1 through 120. And not only did she have her number reversals, but for 27, she would have 72 and so on and so forth. So that was our first clue into it. We brought our concerns to the school. We were told that's just normal first grade stuff. That's how it happens. And unfortunately, well, I guess fortunately for my daughter and us, we didn't really accept that. So we kind of dug a little deeper, learned about dyslexia, and then we got her evaluated and diagnosed. When we took our information to the school, we were told by her teacher that they had never taught a dyslexic before. And we now know that dyslexia is 1 in 5. So that is highly unlikely, as we know. So it just really pushed me to learn more and educate myself in regards to how I could help her become a reader and do better in school and not become, the child left behind, basically.
Megan, and how is she doing now? What grade is she in now?
So she's in 8th grade now. She's doing really well. However, I will say the school did not, they were not willing to help her and do interventions until the end of her 2nd grade year. So I feel like that was kind of a late start for her. So she is still struggling to read. She's working through Wilson, which is an Orton Gillingham curriculum, and that's going well, but it's almost been a life sentence for her, which is rough. Which is why we always say early intervention is best, right? Because we could have gotten this taken care of had they started it in 1st grade, saw it, that would have been 2 extra years of prime learning opportunity at that age. So she's doing good. She's working her way through Wilson. So we're excited about that. But definitely when you know better, you do better.
For sure. Thanks, Megan. Catherine?
Hi there, my name is Catherine Scholl. So happy to be here today. I'm a special education advocate with Right to Read Advocacy. I also have a lot of personal experience with students with disabilities. I'm a mom to 3 daughters, 2 of which have learning disabilities. My journey in becoming an advocate began 18 years ago when my middle daughter was born with many challenges. I realized real quick that I needed to be her voice because I was having such a hard time getting the help that she needed outside. So that experience with her led me to become a special education teacher and a dyslexic interventionist so I could help her. But along the way and over time, I realized that my knowledge base from everything I'd learned with her throughout the years could help families who often needed more guidance and support in navigating the special education system, which I'm sure everybody knows is extremely difficult to navigate. So I left the teaching in the public education system and decided to be an advocate full time so I could share the knowledge that I gained and be that person that I didn't have when I was going through this whole experience. So I've dedicated myself to the advocacy. I love coaching families, helping them understand their rights, and trying to make that process less overwhelming. And because unfortunately, I know firsthand how challenging the path can be. And my goal is to provide the parents with knowledge and support to help make it easier.
Great. Thanks, Catherine. You've gone really through, I think, K through college, right?
Birth.
Through college,
My daughter has been in early intervention since 6 weeks old. So really since birth up to now, she is a freshman in college.
Exciting. And she's doing well.
She's doing the best she can do, which is all I ask.
And along the way, earned a few scholarships too. So she has learned to advocate for herself, I think, too.
Yes, exactly. And that's the goal, right? For all of us to take our knowledge and then teach our children how to be their own voice. So we go from being their voice to now giving them their own voice.
For sure, for sure. And I feel like I'm at the other end of the spectrum. I mean, we started when my son was in K, and he's just moving into 6th grade. So I think I'm the earliest in the journey of advocating for a child with dyslexia. And again, started when he is it was an elementary school. Eventually, we outplaced him to a specialized school for students with dyslexia, and he's really thriving. But now my true challenge of being an advocate is about to come into play as we mainstream him back into the public school district next year for middle school. So I feel like these last few years of educating myself as an advocate will really be tested as we transition back, meaning I really feel like I have the skill set to better participate meaningfully for him at the IEP table. So I think it'd be great now to hear when we've crossed kind of the line of advocating for our own child, because I remember very specifically to this day hiring an advocate for my son and thinking, I would never want to do that. How do people do this for a living, right? Because it felt very overwhelming and emotional. And oftentimes when you hire someone else, that emotion is taken out of the equation, right? So that's the goal, is to have someone who's a bit more neutral and objective. But we all know as advocates that doesn't always happen. Like, we feel for our clients too as well. Regardless, like the others have said, we've learned so much along the way that we want to make it easier and like lessen the load or lighten the burden for other parents who are going through the same journey. So if someone wants to weigh in on like, really, when did you decide? I think mine was through the training that I was having, and we can talk about our training, our advocacy training as well. But when did you decide that you wanted to move from personally advocating for your child to also advocating professionally for others?
For me, I was doing a lot of, like I said, self-learning on my own and diving into specific websites and whatnot. And knowing that I had tried to find an advocate in my area and even an attorney in our area, and there are very few in Iowa. And so that was when, for me, it was like, I want to do whatever I can to help other parents that are in the situation, because I remember when I felt like I was on an island all by myself trying to learn this stuff. I felt like I was the one going to a IEP meeting, and of course I had my husband with me, which was phenomenal. I'm so thankful for his support. But he has a full-time job. He doesn't know the stuff about special education as a mom does, right? So just knowing that you're going into a meeting with 10 other school districts members, staff members sitting around the table is it's just intimidating, right? And so I just wanted to be there for other people, just like I needed for me and myself. And I was lucky. I found a friend who's local in our district who helped me and kind of helped mentor me through that. And I'm very thankful for that. And I always told her, I don't know how I can pay you, but I will pay this forward. And that is how I kind of got into it.
Nice. Thank you, Megan. And you make a really good point. We're very fortunate, I think, in Connecticut and in the New England landscape to have a variety of advocates and special education attorneys to choose from, but that isn't the case across the country, right? There are actually what are known as advocacy deserts, right? There are no advocates in some states. And I really couldn't imagine having to go this alone. So we are grateful, I think, for the variety of advocates that we have here in Connecticut. And I think it's important to know that advocates can practice across the country. So if there is not one available in your state, please do reach out to someone in a neighboring state, and so you can have additional support. Catherine, when did you decide that you wanted to professionally advocate?
I decided that I wanted to do it professionally when I was actually teaching in the public school system, and it was so frustrating to see the disservice that the school districts were doing to a lot of the families, and to recognize how much goes on behind the scenes, and how there's so much red tape. And at that point, I just felt like my position and my knowledge would help families better on the other side of the table. So I had been sitting at the table not only as a parent, but then also as an educator, and you see a lot that goes on. And I just thought that I would offer more of a service, being on the advocate side and teaching parents how to maneuver through that system.
For sure. Thanks, Catherine. And Robin?
I think for me, full disclosure, I started taking courses because advocates are expensive, and I knew my kids were going to be in special education for years, and I thought, you know what, I might as well learn it. And it kind of word gets out that you're taking advocacy courses and that you've gone through this. And, you know, in my particular situation, we had success with getting my son what he needed. And parents started reaching out, and it was like, you know what, I think I can do this. And then beyond that, just being able to be that person to make sure that another family doesn't go through what we went through, just really empowered me and made me want to become an advocate. So I just continue taking courses.
Right, for sure. And then we all met in some way, shape, or form through COPA, which is the Council of Parent Attorneys and Advocates. So I think that would be a key tip for me, is to join COPA as a parent member, which I believe is maybe $50 a year, and they offer scholarships as well for that, or financial support if needed. And it's been a great organization to connect us to other advocates across the country, and also their educational opportunities, be it webinars such as this that they offer, learning paths, and special education advocacy training courses 1.0 through 3.0. So Robin and Catherine, I met Catherine actually in seat 1.0, which is special education advocacy training 1.0. And luckily she was in my backyard, and basically, so we met and we started them. But Catherine, do you want to talk about your seat 1.0 experience, or what value that brought to you as an advocate?
Sure. When I started seat 1.0, I was still working full time in the public school system as a dyslexic specialist, K-12, and that was when I, was really seeing that there was a need for the advocacy, and so I signed up for COPA 1.0, not even knowing what I was getting myself into. And after 2 or 3 classes, I was just hooked, because it really opened my eyes to the law side of it, right? We all know that we have our parental rights. We all get that document, but it can be very confusing and very gray. And so COPA kind of just showed me that there's so much more to the parental rights, and that we do have laws that that support the families and the students to get what they need to succeed. And so that kind of really increased my passion to leave and retire public education. Once I finished 1.0, I knew fully that I was going to continue and then, become an advocate full time. So it really is a great, great program.
For sure. I highly recommend that as well. I echo that. And then Robin, I believe we met during seat 2.0, which is the next course. So just to give you a perspective, if you're interested in training, in advocacy as a parent or professional advocate, 1.0 is about a 9-week course, whereas 2.0 is a 28-week course plus a practicum if you so choose, which is about 40 to 60 hours. And I took that under an attorney, and Catherine did as well, which is really actually for me the funnest part. But Robin and I met in 2.0. Robin, do you want to speak to that experience?
Yeah, it really kind of took 1.0 and went deeper. So everything we learned in 1.0 was kind of, I mean, trust me, it was incredibly empowering. But I think 2.0 really dove deeper into the things that they taught us. And then, just the writing letters and being able to pick apart evaluations and IEPs and that sort of thing. So it was a really great course, and very eye-opening to become a better advocate and know kind of where to pick and choose your battles, right? So to speak.
Thank you. And then Megan, your training was actually through the Dyslexia Training Institute. Could you speak to that?
Yes, so I took mine through the Dyslexia Training Institute, and that's out of California. And the reason that I ended up there is, honestly, I had heard of COPA, but I hadn't joined it, and I really hadn't even dove into COPA much at that point. The reason I chose Dyslexia Training Institute is because Dr. Kelly Salmon Hurley, she is an author of many books that I have loved and read throughout the years. And so she is the one that taught this class through the Dyslexia Training Institute, so the advocacy program. So that is why I ended up there, basically fangirling over the teacher, and then just getting to learn more through her after reading all of her books and finding them extremely helpful. So It just like you guys said, basically with SEAT 1.0, it was about a 9-week course that we took, and it included a practicum on ours as well. And it dove, like Catherine said, it dove more deep into the laws. And like Robin said, it also dove into letters and how we can write letters. And it showed us letters that have been written throughout the IDEA that we could refer to help bring our points and whatnot across to the school districts, you know, because unfortunately when we go in there, they don't always want to hear what we have to say, but when we can back it by other cases that have happened, it's just a phenomenal asset. So having that dyslexia training behind my back has been amazing.
Great. And I can include the resources for DTI and COPA in the follow-up email. And I believe the costs vary anywhere from $900 a course to maybe, I don't remember what SEAT 2.0 was, maybe closer to $1,500, maybe?
I don't remember exactly, but I think in the ballpark,
Yeah,
in that
so just
range.
knowing that it's an investment for sure in your education as an advocate. All right, so let's dive into the meat here. Why everyone wants to come hopefully to the webinar, because they want to hear really what is one thing that you learned as an advocate through your training that you first wish you knew as a parent. And I'll let you each answer, but then I'll have some specific follow-up questions for you as well. So Megan, do you want to start there? What is one thing that you learned as an advocate that you wish you had known as a parent?
100%. The biggest piece of advice I've learned and that I pass on is that if it's not in writing, it didn't happen. And I learned that from a book by Pete Wright. And honestly, that's exactly my story. Is in first grade, I kept talking to the school and kept asking them about it. And they would say, oh, we need to do more intervention. Oh, we need to try this. We need to try that. I didn't realize that had I put it in writing that I wanted an academic evaluation, which is what I had been asking verbally for all along, it would have been taken more seriously. And that's just a hard pill to swallow. So basically, I feel like, you know, I kind of delayed that process by not knowing that if it's not in writing, it didn't happen. Which that's, like I said, my biggest piece to everyone is just always follow up with an email if the school calls you, which oftentimes in our state they do. They call you to talk through things. I always send an email follow-up with what we've talked about, just so that it's in writing somewhere so we can circle back to that if need be.
Absolutely, Megan. Thank you for that. If it's not in writing, it didn't happen. I think the challenge there for parents is often, and I always find this to be such a disconnect, is that you get the procedural safeguards when you're in the special education process. But how do you get to the special education process, right? So you typically need to put your request in writing for a referral for an evaluation, right? For eligibility for special education, but you don't know that because you don't have the handbook yet, right? So for me, I always want to inform parents that to put that request for evaluation in writing. I've seen so many parents who don't do that, who like you, or, you know, evaluation is delayed for years. And I think it's super important. So I don't know how to bridge. I don't know if it's like when you enter kindergarten, you get this handbook just in case you need it, but us informing parents to be able to bridge that gap. And when you do get those procedural safeguards, which we'll talk about, reading them, right? It's not something you typically want to do, but I wish I didn't read them at the end of the process. I wish I had read them at the beginning, and we can dive into procedural safeguards in a minute. Robin, what is one thing that you wanted to share that you had learned?
It's actually a procedural safeguard. So, you know, I'll admit I never read them. And I think that was one of my biggest mistakes as a parent, was not reading that booklet. But learning what prior written notice actually is, because in my particular experience, we had a IEP meeting for my daughter, and it was going over an evaluation, and I wanted some of the recommendations implemented, and the district said no. And I was feeling rather empowered because this was after SEAT 1.0, and I was like, okay, I want prior written notice, which is a document that the district has to give you if they're proposing or refusing an action. In this case, I asked for the recommendations to be implemented. They said no. I said, oh, okay, can you give me prior written notice for that? And then it was, oh, well, actually, we'll do more evaluations. And, you know, in the end, they did do more evaluations, and I ended up getting reading goals and objectives for my daughter. But you know, it's exactly this webinar. If I knew then what I know now, how much more effective I could have been as a parent to get things for my kids.
Yeah, prior written notice is important, particularly in states where you need two-party consent to record a IEP meeting, which is something that's happening for some of my clients in Pennsylvania. So it's a all-party consent state. And so if you can't really get on recording on record that they're denying an action, what else can you do? And it is that prior written notice, which is really key. So if they deny the evaluation, if they deny, you know, maybe one-on-one support, if they deny an AT consult, whatever it might be, just making sure that you get that in writing, that will be important for your child. Catherine, what is one thing that you learned?
Well, it's interesting because mine kind of builds onto what you all said, you know, is the parental safeguards, and then making sure that everything is in writing, and then also knowing that you should never ever take no for an answer. So just because the district says no to something, that doesn't mean that that's written in stone, that I have learned that there is a solution to every problem that you encounter. It's just that you have to be your own little investigator, unfortunately. You kind of have to put a detective cap on and do the research and go back to the district and say, okay, you said no, but this is my right. And, you know, like Jennifer said, put it in writing. And because there is truly a solution to every problem. And we do have the rights to back it up and the laws to back it up. Unfortunately, the school districts may not always be as transparent as they should be about the options that your child and you may have. And it may not be that they're doing it on purpose. It may be that they also don't know the laws inside and out. And so we have to be, you know, consumers almost, and know what our options are. So at the end of the day, my biggest advice as an advocate is never take no for an answer. There's always a solution.
Great, thank you for that. And I do want to go back to what Megan had said about not having something in writing and wishing you had known, and it builds off of Catherine in the sense that we also do trust the school district initially, right? So you wouldn't think that you'd need to push to record a meeting or have something in writing or even accept, you know, no for an answer, because you're thinking that the school district has the best interest of your child at heart. And they certainly may, but their hands may be tied with resources or the ability to provide the services that your child needs. So then knowing what your rights are when that happens. So let's just stay on this topic of procedural safeguards for a minute. So what are those? So procedural safeguards are a written explanation of your rights under IDEA, and those should be provided to you at least once a year if your child is in special education. So at least once. States have different times when they should be, you know, provided if you've requested an evaluation, if it's your annual IEP review, triennial, et cetera. If you have a hard time understanding these, which I think most of us do, you can certainly ask for further explanation of your rights. You can ask that from the school district. And these procedural safeguards are really your rights about the procedures of special education, which do include parent participation. And I think this was a key takeaway for me with COPA training, is knowing that as a parent, it is my right to meaningfully participate in an IEP meeting. And what does that mean? So I'll open that up and, you know, maybe weigh in at the end, but who would like to talk about what it means to meaningfully participate as a parent?
I'll jump in. It's hard, like I mentioned before, because you go to a table with roughly 10 district employees, right? And then you're the mom at the table. But even though you're that one person, we have a right to request certain curriculums. We have a right to request, within reason, obviously, certain assessments to be done with certain things that the schools, unfortunately, at least in my experience, they aren't used to having parents request that, right? They're used to, like Jennifer said, just doing what they know is best and us trusting them. And so it's hard when we come to the table with some different ideas. But again, I just feel like I want to say schools honestly, I don't feel like they're out to get us, obviously, right? They just don't know what they don't know either. And they also kind of go with what they do know. They go with what's normal and what's easy for them and what they've always done. So for us as a parent to bring a different idea or a different assessment to their to the table, it's sometimes can be hard for them to consider. But then once they realize that we have a right to that parent participation, we have a right to ask those questions, and if they're going to deny it, which they also have a right to do, then get it in prior written notice. It's just all part of that parental participation that they really, IDEA really wants to encourage parents to do, but oftentimes parents are so nervous to do.
You're right. It can be very intimidating. It is to sit at a table with 10 to 12 other professionals, and then sometimes the Board of Ed attorney, so it is good to know your rights, and then to also bring someone along with you, regardless of whether or not you have concerns. It's always good to have someone who is kind of on your team, right? And in your court for your child. And that could be just a friend or a neighbor. It could be a trained advocate, just someone else there with you to really lessen that level of intimidation and to also help absorb what you're hearing, right? Because sometimes these IEP meetings can go over 2 hours long. Like, that is a lot of information to take in and then to be able to act upon meaningfully in that moment. Does anybody else want to weigh in on examples of meaningful participation? And then
I
I'll take
do. I think understanding everything. So if your child was evaluated, whether it was their initial, their triennial, or just a targeted assessment, understanding what that assessment was looking at, understanding the results, getting those assessments at least, I would say, 3 days before the actual IEP meeting so that you have a chance to go over them. And as a parent, you're not expected to know all of this. There's no way you could. So working with a school and saying, hey, can you explain this to me? And asking them over and over again until you understand it, I think is super important too. And they should, they should be able to sit with you and explain it in a way that you get it so that you can then go to the table and advocate for your child.
Great. Thank you, Catherine. Anything to add?
Just to reiterate that you are an equal member of the team when you're sitting at that table, and it is very hard not to be emotional and to try and be objective. So it is helpful to have, like Jennifer was saying, even if it's a friend or somebody, to kind of pick up on things that maybe you didn't hear because emotions were running high.
Thank you. I think one of the thing I learned that I think helps me personally and some clients with parent participation is preparing a parent letter or parent statement, because it helps to first organize your ideas and what you're hoping to present or discuss at the meeting. So that parent letter can include any of your concerns at the time. You can certainly acknowledge the team for things that are going well, but maybe bring up additional concerns that you have, bulleting those key items and using that as an agenda to guide the discussion in the meeting has helped me to participate more meaningfully in IEP meetings. So I just wanted to add that. There was a question here. If they deny something you feel strongly about, do you recommend mediation before dispute resolution? Does anyone want to weigh in there? Mediation, from my understanding, is a type of dispute resolution. Perhaps you're thinking of maybe going further to due process. I certainly would always recommend mediation before due process. Due process is a very time-consuming, resource-heavy, emotional process to go through. So I think whenever you can mediate first, that would be beneficial. Please weigh in, though, team, if you feel otherwise before due process. Yes.
I also think the big thing is, like we've mentioned, is prior written notice. Ask the school to provide you with prior written notice stating that they're not going to do it. For some reason, asking them to put that in writing makes them think again about what you're passionate about, and makes them consider maybe there's a different way we can look at this. Like Catherine said, there's always a way around it and something else we can look at. We just have to get we just have to be creative in our thinking, right? So I think the biggest thing is to go into the prior written notice and requesting that be in writing that they're denying it. And then, yes, I would at that point, if you're so strongly about it, would request mediation. Oftentimes in that moment, I feel like If they're denying it, they've brought other ideas to the table. So then as long as I have it in prior written notice, I'm okay waiting a little bit and seeing how it goes and then circling back to that, because I feel like once you circle back, it's again, you've denied it once. I still think that this is important. I think that that helps a lot as well, just giving it a little bit of time to reintroduce the idea back to it. But yeah, mediation, I agree with Jennifer wholeheartedly, always before due process for sure.
Right, and it's also good to have a handle on the landscape of due process results in your state. So hopefully you can find that on your state's Department of Education website. Reading the due process cases that have been fully adjudicated from the year or two prior and seeing how those are ruled on. Also, if a parent takes a case to due process, the percentage is without an attorney, the percentage is pretty low that they'll win. So just knowing whether or not you need an attorney to help with your due process proceeding. And on the East Coast, that becomes very expensive, typically upward of $30,000, 40, 50. So yes, I certainly would suggest trying to mediate on an issue first. All right. Just circling back here on things that we've learned, I just want to speak quickly about independent educational evaluations, because I always remembered as a parent hearing you should ask for an IE and not necessarily knowing what that meant. So what does it mean when you disagree? Well, I'm kind of giving the answer, but when you disagree with an evaluation, you have the right as a parent to ask for an independent educational evaluation. Catherine, do you want to weigh in on that? Oh, sorry, she's just recovering from the flu, so she's trying to hang in there. Someone else can certainly weigh in too. I was just doing a round robin here.
Sure, I don't mind. So an IEE is when you ask the district to do an evaluation because you disagree with the evaluation that they did. And then it is with the evaluator of your choice. Sometimes the district will offer you a list of evaluators. You do not have to go off of that list. And I think that that is one of the most important things to understand is a true IEE is when you pick the evaluator. So it's where it's paid for by public expense. And then, so if you ask for a neuropsych, then you get the neuropsych and the district pays for it. The other important thing to know about any evaluation, whether it's an IEE or whether it's a district evaluation, is that your district has to consider it, but they don't have to agree with it. And I think that's something that's ultra important for parents to understand, that just because you have this private neuropsych, but even if you pay for it, it doesn't matter who paid for it. It doesn't mean that you're going back to the IEP table and your district is going to say, oh yeah, well, we'll implement all these recommendations. It's a team decision, and you have the meeting and hopefully they agree, but they don't always.
For sure. Thank you. That was a really good point about they do not have to include the recommendations, which can be really frustrating as a parent, because typically when you have an outside evaluation, the evaluations are the recommendations are quite lengthy, pages of recommendations to improve the educational programming, but they might not be implemented. Anyone? Oh, Catherine, sure.
Sorry about that. It's also important to note that with an IEE, that if you do request an IEE and the district denies it, they have to file due process. So there's only two outcomes of a request for an IEE. Either they request it and they pay for it, or they have to file due process.
Right. And know too that if you get to that spot and you don't want to move forward with due process, you can withdraw your request, but obviously seek proper counsel before you take actions along those lines. All right, there is a question here about how much have you contributed to IEP goals and objectives? So as parents or advocates, I don't know how you want to answer that question, but how much you contribute to goals and objectives. So we know that when you have an evaluation and you're looking at the strengths and weaknesses of the child, those should drive the goals and objectives, or in some states, just goals, there aren't objectives, for the IEP. And how much have you contributed? I'll open that up. Anyone there? Okay.
I feel like I've contributed quite substantially when it comes to specifically encoding and decoding goals. I feel like that's something that goes unmentioned in schools. Spelling, basically, I guess I should say. Spelling is kind of a thing of the past because we have assistive technology now and spell check and all that stuff, right? But with the dyslexic, we know that teaching them the specific graphemes and phonemes helps them for encoding and decoding. So decoding is sounding out, encoding is spelling, helps them do all of that correctly. And then it gives them also that confidence that they can use some of those bigger words as they learn what those prefixes and suffixes and whatnot are. So a lot of times that's something that I go to is just trying to get a goal in regards to that, because oftentimes that's not the case. So again, if you feel like there's specific goals or objectives that you want to see on there, you absolutely can bring that up. And then again, if they deny them, you can get a prior written notice and you can re-look at that in a year. I always like to go back to the assessments that are given and see exactly what the assessments say. Look at not just the assessments, because they're going to tell you, here's your assessment scores, and Catherine can dive into this more, but they're not going to tell you, or they're going to tell you, here's the assessment scores, but you can look into the subtests, you can look into all of that are going to specifically tell you what goals really need to be honed in on. And again, like Jennifer said, needs drive services, right? So then that gives us a foot to stand on when we say we really feel like this would be a great goal.
And that's when it goes back to what Jennifer was saying before about that we as parents are meaningful participants in the IEP process. So we certainly have a voice at the table when we're talking about what our child needs to work on. Remember, they're only seeing a snapshot of your child during the school hours. You know what's happening at home. And so that knowledge at the table is so, so important. And so when we're talking about goals and objectives, sometimes the educators aren't really that versed with dyslexic learners. And so sometimes parents come to the table with more knowledge about, like what Megan was talking about, the encoding, the decoding piece. Depending on what state you're in, a lot of states haven't caught up with Orton Gillingham and Wilson and the best way to teach a dyslexic learner. And that's where it comes back to what we talked about being a detective and knowing like what programs or what approaches work best with dyslexic learners. And you'd be surprised. Sometimes you may have teachers at the table that say, oh, I've never heard of that. Like, thank you for sharing. A lot of times I have my clients, we put together information that we send to the district, to the teachers, to the supervisor, and say, here's research on this and here's research on that. And then always going back to what Megan said before, you have to know what the data says. It's so important. And that's where an advocate can come in and really dive deep into that data. And the data has to drive the goals and objectives. Otherwise, there's no reason in having an IEP. So just remember, you are an active and equal member of that IEP team.
Great, thank you. And I also think with measuring goals and objectives, what is really helpful is to look at the frequency of progress monitoring. The IEP is set for the year, but can you look at progress more frequently, such as maybe if it's appropriate, monthly data collection, rather than just the progress reports 3 times a year. We certainly could go into a lot more in goals and objectives, but there are a few more questions that I'd like to move forward from those who are listening. And then I have my own questions too, so there's a lot more. So our school is refusing evaluation and we are considering an independent evaluation. What is the process to have this covered by the district? Going to the superintendent ? So interestingly, an IE is not a IEP meeting decision. You typically have to submit that request in writing to the appropriate person in your district. For us, it's our director of pupil services per se here in our district. And interestingly, that person solely decides whether or not your IE is going to be funded. There are not criteria, there's no checkbox or rubric. It's whether or not that person chooses to fund the IE. Please weigh in if it's different elsewhere, team.
It's my understanding that the decision is based off of, and obviously not in your case because they're refusing to do the eval, but say there's a child that had their initial evaluation and the parent says, hey, I don't agree with the speech and language portion. And so you ask for an IEE for that. I've heard, and of course, we don't have all the inside answers, but I've heard that it's basically, they look at that speech and language and see, hey, did we check all the boxes that are required within the IDEA, which is the federal law that governs special education? If they say yes, then they say, no, we're not going to fund it. If they see, well, actually the parent, if this goes to due process, kind of has this on us, then they say, okay, we'll pay for it. But I'm assuming that is part of the process, but I'm sure there's probably more to it that we just don't know. I mean, I've never worked in a school district, so.
Thanks. Catherine or Megan?
Other thing I want to mention is if they're refusing an evaluation, I would love to know why. Like, what did they tell you why? Are they wanting to see more about his response to intervention? What are they looking at? And specifically that if they were to say, we want to see more response to intervention, then again, there's ways where we can say that's not allowed. Like, you can't do that. You can't postpone an evaluation because you're waiting to see how they respond to intervention. Especially from what I've gathered, especially when a parent brings up an evaluation, it's crazy for the schools to not consider it, because honestly, then they're kind of lacking in their child find efforts. So they're dropping the ball when it comes to, like Robin said, IDEA. So there's ways we can go back to them and find out, why exactly you're refusing the evaluation. And if you as mom know exactly what's going on, if you have a diagnosis or whatnot, then you can push back on that.
Right. Thank you for that. The follow-up from that parent was they're saying they're seeing no issue, but I have proof there is. Yeah, so that does get tricky, and I'm not sure if that would be an initial eval or not, but definitely feel free to reach out to us and we can chat through that question further. There was a recommendation regarding goals and objectives. In Connecticut, we can Google CT said goals, and there are videos on how to write data-driven goals. Not sure if other states have similar guidance. For sure. That is a good resource for us here in Connecticut. Thank you.
To answer the question about they didn't see the issues, but she has the proof, right? Remember, it's on the burden of the district to file due process if they say no to an IEE. So if they're in violation of child find, if you have proof that there's an issue and they're saying that there isn't, then that's a child find issue. If you request the IEE and they say no, based on that they're not seeing anything, they have to, by law, file a due process to go to mediation, and then a mediator decides whether the IE is appropriate or not. So it's the burden of the school district to file the due process, not the parent.
Great, thank you. A question here, are progress reports standardized? Some schools use teacher monitoring, which doesn't seem acceptable. I am in New Jersey.
So progress reports, every state has a different way of formulating an IEP. Here in Connecticut, everything's online. In New York, I believe they still send the paper copies in the mail right after the report cards are posted. So it's really state by state. But the progress monitoring, which looks a little different than progress reports, is really a unique progress monitoring sheet that you would discuss in your IEP based on your child's needs. So I have some students that get their progress monitoring every 8 weeks, and it's sent by the instructor that's doing the Orton Gillingham or that's doing the structured literacy. And that was written in the IEP. So it's explicitly written in that parent will receive, such and such data every 8 weeks. I've had parents that have gotten it every 4 weeks. So that looks very different than those standardized progress reports that they have to send with a quarterly or based on whatever their report card period is. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, thank you. Great. I do want to circle back to, again, things that we learned through our advocacy training and wrap up with this point here. Again, one of my key takeaways was that as parents, we certainly have rights when it comes to resolving issues, right? I did not realize that I could file a state complaint, right? That I had no idea. And it's actually very easy to do. So I want to just talk about dispute resolutions options briefly here. as we conclude what we've learned. But there is the state complaint. If you have an issue with the IEP, the substance of the IEP, so a substantive complaint or a procedural complaint. If your student receives services with a 504 plan, that is something that you can file with the Office of Civil Rights. And then we learned a lot about, bullying. If your child is bullying, which sometimes happens for students with disabilities, you can also file a bullying complaint as well. You start there with your school district, but all important resolutions options to know. I had no idea when I started, but feel free to weigh in if you knew otherwise, because I didn't. No, please. Anyone want to expand there? No? That covers it?
You've covered it all.
Okay, that covers it. I will say, some of these options, if you move forward to a mediation, perhaps like you're saying, the IEE was denied, the request was denied, and you move forward through due process. Typically, you meet in mediation first, and this becomes an issue of weighing, your resources. Do you want to spend a few $1,000s mediating if you have attorney representation, or do you want to take those few $1,000s and use them towards an evaluation, right? And when it comes further, if you need outplacement, depending upon the cost of that school, how do you want to spend the resources that you have? And I think as parents, I'll speak for myself, you can certainly get caught up in the emotions in that process and wanting to be right and do what's right for your child, and to prove a point, maybe, that the school did not provide that free and appropriate public education, that your child wasn't making meaningful progress. But trying to keep those emotions in check and leverage the safeguards that we have in place as parents. Hold on, there's a question here, and then I'm going to do, I think, a lightning round for the last few because we're running out of time. So I've recently come across districts delineating between progress, monitoring and monitoring progress. I can't find anywhere these are separated, any information. So your progress monitoring, here's how I'm quickly interpreting that, would be that quarterly, or is it quarterly? Quarterly progress, is it 3 times a year? 3 times a year? Quarterly progress monitoring data that comes with the IEP plan, whereas, and this could be wrong, but monitoring progress, I think of it as that 4 to 6 weeks data that you'd be getting, but perhaps we're splitting hairs. Yeah, Catherine, please.
Actually, the progress monitoring is the data that we use to drive the progress marks. So when you get your progress marks, they should have several dates with data, right? There should be like October 10th, 2004. He read 10 out of 15 CVC words with 85% accuracy, or then all those 4 data points would then dictate whether he was progressing satisfactory or mastered the skill. So the progress monitoring is the authentic raw data that drives the progress marks. And a lot of districts don't do progress monitoring. Therefore, when you get your progress marks, they're basically like, he's doing great. That's it, one line.
Exactly.
So that's the difference.
Thank you. Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking. So our son was in public school. We had data actually every 4 weeks, and that data every 4 weeks should have drove the progress monitoring. So you have something more quantitative if you're looking at progress monitoring more frequently than once a quarter. There's a question here. Can you elaborate on FAPE? Sure, that is, your child's right to receive a free and appropriate public education. And if your child is receiving special education, they have the right to make meaningful progress, right? In light of their disability. FAPE is definitely a much larger discussion, but if you have a more specific question, I'm more than happy to answer that as well. And then I believe my child may have dyslexia. She was given a psychoeducational evaluation at school. And then it seems like she has a reading disability, possibly dyslexia, but she is too young to know, and they can't diagnose that. 2nd grade. Well, that makes me twitch a little. Sorry. Would my next step be to request a neuropsych through an IEE?
Well, I will say that I believe this is across the board, but specifically in Iowa, schools cannot diagnose. So they will not tell you she has dyslexia. They will do exactly what the school said. She likely has a reading disability, possibly dyslexia. But honestly, specifically in Iowa, because we're a non-categorical state, which means they don't have to say why we're getting an IEP or whatnot. It doesn't matter. The fact that they know that and they're recognizing that she likely has a reading disability, they need to do something to help her.
And
Yeah,
in
yes,
the
Kristen,
state
that's
of
a good
Connecticut,
question
we
too. Which state? Yeah, sorry.
in the
Mhm.
state of Connecticut, we actually can classify students with dyslexia. It's one of our 13 options on the IEP. So if the district is acknowledging that the student has, maybe indications of dyslexia or, a reading disability, it doesn't matter what you call it. At the end of the day, the student needs appropriate instruction, and that usually looks like structured literacy. So if they're saying, and first of all, not too young, actually, second grade is a little bit on the late side. I mean, from all of the research that we know, red flags you can see red flags as early as 4 years old when you're doing screeners. So my advice would be to go back to the district with the data that they provided you with, and then, and have a team meeting and ask for an appropriate program to address the child's reading disability.
And then try the intervention and see if the child's making progress, right? I mean,
Oh, of course, yes.
we would request the neuropsych.
I wouldn't go, yeah, I wouldn't go down
Again,
that
it
road
also
yet
depends
because,
on how in depth that initial eval is. Mhm.
yeah, and if the district's already admitting that they're seeing the disability, that's half the battle, right? Once the district acknowledges there's an issue, that's really the hard part but now it's taking what they have and then working a plan.
Mhm. Okay, how do you define sufficient progress? The district claims progress has been made, but I don't think it's sufficient per the law. That is always could be the challenge, right? Your child, as I mentioned, is entitled to making meaningful progress. What does that look like? It depends upon the child and their disability. If you have a child reading 3 grade levels behind and, a year later, they're still reading 3 grade levels behind, I would probably say that's not meaningful progress, right? But having someone help you look at that data would be helpful. Sorry, I was reading the next question as well. I believe she requests a full cognitive eval to cover all. You can certainly request the IEE. That is well within your right, but the question is, will they grant that IEE? Was the evaluation, sufficient? Did it cover all areas of suspected disability? And since they are acknowledging the reading disability, like we were saying, that's great. Now let's try the appropriate intervention. All right, good. Phew, 1 minute to go, but I have 3 more questions. So let's do a quick lightning round here with these. What have been the most valuable resources on your journey as an advocate and a parent? And I'm just going to go in order here. Robin?
Definitely Taking Seat 1.0. And I think another great resource that Right to Read has, which kind of sets us apart from most other advocates, is my colleagues. I mean, it's like the meeting of the minds when we have something that we're stuck on and we need help with, or just to bounce off somebody else. We all get together and talk about it. And I think that that is probably one of the greatest resources, is having other people's opinions. And, they might have another resource that you weren't aware of. Everything's always changing. So
Cool. Thanks for that, Robin. I think I'll just build upon that in looking at resources in your community too. Like, don't go it alone. There are other parents with dyslexic students in your school district. Certainly find them. Find those who have gone ahead of you. Those who are years ahead might have resources, for your child in that school district that you never had thought of. Megan, resources?
For me in Iowa, we are very blessed with Decoding Dyslexia Iowa, and our website is phenomenal. And so that has been a huge resource for me. And then also understood.org is a wonderful resource as well.
You're right. They do a great job breaking down, I think, hard topics for sure. Catherine?
My biggest resource has been my daughter, because at every stage that we've gone through with her, from birth through 18, there's been a new problem. And so we've uncovered the solution together. And so I've learned so much just from watching her go through this and become the person that she is.
For sure. Thank you. What has been the biggest challenge when advocating for your child? Catherine, I'll start with you. The biggest challenge?
The biggest challenge is keeping your emotions at bay when you're at a meeting and you're trying to be professional, but your heart is breaking and you feel like you're Mike Tyson boxing 18 rounds against him. It's really hard to keep the emotions in check. So that has always been my biggest challenge, is to try and stay objective and keep telling myself I know what I'm talking about and I'm going to get my child what she needs.
Thanks, Megan.
As I've referred to multiple times throughout this podcast, I would say the biggest challenge for me was being the one person at the table of 10 professionals, school staff. That was my hardest thing.
Thank you, Robin.
Finding the confidence to stand my ground and say, I'm right and you're wrong. My child is struggling. You know, I realize that the school may not see it, but I see it, and I am that child's parent, and they may all be experts on education. However, you're an expert on your child, so it's okay to put your foot down and tell them no.
For sure. Thank you. And I think mine is just always anticipating what's next, what's to come, because there's a different challenge at every age and every grade level. And like I said, we're getting ready to go back into middle school, and it'll be interesting to see what awaits, but I'm sure we will, tackle that together, because he's a good advocate for himself as well, my little one. All right. How has being a parent to a child with dyslexia informed your advocacy? Last question here.
It's given me a very deep understanding of what families go through. Dyslexia doesn't just turn off at the end of the school day. You know, I've lived in a house where dyslexia affected our home life 24/7. And I think that has really empowered me to advocate a little harder for these kids.
Thanks. Megan?
Mine goes along exactly with what Robin said. It has given me the empathy to understand what my daughter's going through. And when she asks me, we've lived in the same house, had the same trash can forever. And we say, take care of your plate after dinner. And she says, well, where's the trash can? And you're like, wait a minute, what? It helps remind me that she just needs time to sit back and think for a second, and then she'll be able to figure it out. So giving her that grace to do that and that time to do that in a safe place. And then also trying to bring that to the IEP meeting and reminding some of the educators that some of the things they say, while they're not meaning to upset the kids, it does come back on the kids and cause them some emotional strife as well. So empathy is the biggest thing for me.
Catherine?
For me, it's definitely the knowledge that I've gathered along the way. And I feel like that's what, drives me to help others, is just, sharing that knowledge.
Great. Thank you. And I think for me, it's really just seeing that anything's possible when our kids have the right access to the right resources. So I went from watching him not even be able to say the word cat at the end of 2nd grade to fully reading now at the middle of 5th grade. And I know it's because he had access to intensive reading instruction. So I certainly believe that's possible for our kids with dyslexia. Well, thank you. Whew, we covered a lot in the last hour. Thank you for all those who attended. And as a quick thank you, we were going to share 2 texts that we wanted to perhaps do as giveaways. If you're still on and you are interested in either, if you could just pop in the chat your name and then like the short title of the book. And then I'll see these after and I can kind of do one for a giveaway. So this one is all about tests and assessments, and it's by Wright's Law, which is another great resource. This was my go-to book when I was trying to understand what the assessments actually said and meant, and how to what percentile equivalent to standard score, all of that jazz. So this book was super helpful for me. If you have any interest in a free copy of this book, just pop in test and your name and we will give that one away. And the other one that we have found helpful, another Wright's Law book called All About IEPs. So again, just type in IEPs in your name and we will be giving away a copy of these books. All right, so I'll give that a minute. You can include that in the chat as a thank you for attending today, and thanks for your questions.